Hello, everyone. Now you'll hear a brief summary of the movie Just Like Heaven. Enjoy watching. Elizabeth is an intern who devotes all her time to work. She hardly sleeps to help as many patients as possible. Her colleagues start relationships, get married, raise children. Unlike them, she has no personal life. Elizabeth is content with her work. She has no other concerns. Elizabeth is the complete opposite of her sister Abby, a homemaker and mother of 2 daughters. Abby plans to set her sister up with a guy, a friend of her acquaintance. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is making strides in her professional life. The head doctor informs her that she's being hired at the hospital. The supervisor urges Elizabeth to finally go home and rest. She's been on duty for a whole 26 hours. The girl had already changed and was entering the elevator, but a male nurse stopped her, unsure about a patient's diagnosis. Elizabeth simply couldn't refuse. Because of this, she's late for dinner with her sister, just like that guy. Due to fatigue and bad weather, Elizabeth didn't notice a truck in front of her and got into an accident. We're introduced to the second character, David, who is looking for a suitable apartment. But each option is stranger than the last. The realtor couldn't offer anything reasonable. Then, a flyer about an apartment for rent was blown to David's feet by the wind. He initially brushed it off, but the persistent flyer sticks to him again. Perhaps it's fate. Finally, David finds himself in an apartment with a normal interior. However, there's one peculiarity: the apartment is only available for monthly rent, with the possibility of renewal. The realtor doesn't know why, and relatives don't want to talk about it. Most importantly for David in the desired accommodation is the sofa, as he plans to spend all his free time on it. David spends evenings in front of the TV and drinks beer. Suddenly, he encounters Elizabeth in the kitchen. She mistakes him for a thief or a homeless person, as she is the one renting the apartment. Elizabeth fully furnished it, and it's painful for her to see what kind of slob has moved in. She went to the kitchen for a cloth and a bucket and disappeared as suddenly as she appeared. To prevent this from happening again, David installed another lock, but the lady reappeared for a moment. David told his friend Jack about his phantom guest. Yes, he was drunk at the time, but he'd never hallucinated an annoying blonde before. Jack is a psychologist and gives him advice on how to get back to a normal life and stop digging into himself. Something terrible happened to David 2 years ago, which knocked him off track. Now he's afraid that the blonde might suddenly appear out of nowhere at any moment. The lady appeared when David was sleeping. Elizabeth concluded that the uninvited guest is crazy, imagining that he rented the apartment, as she knows all the details about the place and can easily prove it. Elizabeth noticed that her photo had disappeared from the nightstand. She got upset and decided to call the police after all, but her hand somehow passed through the phone. Surprised, she went to the kitchen phone, and David didn't see her again today. David called the realtor to find out who lived in the apartment before him. The girl's relatives don't want to talk about it. Presumably, she died. David felt uneasy and decided to read something about the afterlife. The salesman, Daryl, was knowledgeable and recommended a couple of books. In the evening, David started summoning the spirit of his neighbor. But Elizabeth appeared only when David almost placed a dirty cup on her expensive table. It was time for him to ask questions, but the girl couldn't even remember her name, let alone what she does outside the house. David hinted to Elizabeth that she's no longer a tenant, and perhaps it's time for her to look around, see the bright light, and finally ascend to heaven. The girl didn't even notice how she ended up in the middle of the table. Elizabeth wanted to kick the man out, but she herself fell out of the window. Now the ghost haunts David throughout the apartment. She condemns him for drinking and doesn't let him watch TV, singing along to some song. David's nerves broke, and he called a priest to exorcise the demon from his apartment. But it was in vain. Even Chinese rituals didn't help. The same goes for ghost hunters. They only pretended to trap the spirit in a pyramid. The last option remained, and David invited Daryl over and didn't go wrong. The guy feels Elizabeth's presence and even her hostility. He advises David to move out, but David, on the contrary, wants the girl to go towards the light. except she can't see any light. Daryl sensed that this spirit is somehow too alive, as if the girl herself is still alive. By the way, David has a very dark aura. He can't pull his ex out of his heart. True, she didn't dump David, as Elizabeth joked. His wife died. The ghost apologized, and an angry David went to the bar. Elizabeth came to the establishment with a neighbor and forbids him from getting drunk. The girl torments David, causing him to twitch and talk to himself. To prevent the widower from downing a glass of whiskey, the spirit possessed him and began to control his body. The distraught man went to the park, and Elizabeth wonders what happened to her and why only David can see her. When he's not around, it's as if she doesn't exist. Elizabeth can't remember who she is and was, and there's no one but David who can help her figure it out. The man talked to all the neighbors, but no one really knows who lived in his apartment before. Only one girl remembered the unsociable blonde. She started flirting with David, but he quickly escaped from her. David asks Elizabeth not to follow him. She's like a radio he can't turn off. The widower was about to drink again, but suddenly found a lead, a dry cleaning receipt. The employee remembers Elizabeth, a pleasant but melancholic girl, radiating loneliness and sadness. Elizabeth remembered that she really wanted to visit a certain restaurant, but couldn't find the time for it. Suddenly, one of the guests felt unwell. No one knows how to administer first aid to him except Elizabeth. She tells David what to do, and all he needs to do is make an incision between the ribs. Cutting through the skin, David inserted a pipette into the wound, and the man was able to breathe again. Elizabeth realized that she worked as a doctor, and the name of the nearest hospital is familiar to her. The administrator sent David to talk to Dr. Fran. The man lied that they were dating Elizabeth, but Fran finds it hard to believe because the intern lived only for her work. It's even stranger that he knows nothing about the accident. 3 months have passed since then. Elizabeth rushed down the corridor and found the room where she lies. The girl has been in a coma for 3 months. David was relieved. His neighbor didn't die after all. But there's not much good here either. 3 months is too deep of a coma. Elizabeth tries to put her soul back into her body, but nothing works. David took Elizabeth's hand, and she felt a tingling sensation. So, the connection with her body is not lost yet. There was a photograph on the windowsill in the room, the one Elizabeth was looking for. It's time for David to go home. He calls the girl to come with him, but she stays. Her place is now here. Instead of Elizabeth, another intern became a doctor, and Brad couldn't care less about the patients, unlike her. Elizabeth saw her nieces, but for some reason, she can't feel their touch, and her sister can't see her. Brad took Abby to the corridor and told her that Elizabeth was against artificial life extension. She signed a refusal, but this is a special case, and they can't disconnect the equipment without her sister's consent. And Elizabeth's opinion has radically changed, and she really hopes that Abby won't sign anything. David became sad again, but he didn't start drinking. Instead, he began using a coaster. David's neighbor Katrina came over. She claimed her door got stuck, so she wants to wait for the locksmith here. The energetic lady promotes herself as best she can, but David's thoughts are occupied with another matter, and she has reappeared in his life. Elizabeth told him that she could be disconnected very soon, so she needs his help. Katrina invites David to join her. Elizabeth peeked into the room through the door and saw a tattoo on Katrina's behind that read "All Aboard." The girl left the room, and Elizabeth started encouraging David to jump into action, assuring him that she won't get in his way. Instead, David came to Elizabeth on the rooftop and told his friend about how his wife suddenly grabbed her head and fell during an argument. It was a brain hemorrhage, and he didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to her. Elizabeth admitted that even if Abby doesn't sign the documents, it won't change anything. Her brain activity is decreasing every day. David decided to prove that he wasn't always such a gloomy person. He worked as a landscape architect and even had his own firm. And Elizabeth always dreamed of having her own garden. David promised her that he would definitely return to creating such beauty. Suddenly, David received a call from the realtor, informing him that the apartment's owners are finally ready to sign a long-term contract. He realized that he urgently needed to talk to Elizabeth's sister. But for Abby to believe David, he needs to know some secret about her that only they and Elizabeth share. And Elizabeth remembered that her sister kissed an ex-boyfriend 5 minutes before her wedding. David lied to Abby, telling her that he was once a patient of Elizabeth. The young woman herself suspects that her niece Lily can also see her. David begs the woman to give her sister a little more time, but it was already too late. She signed the papers. The system will be turned off tomorrow. David realized he had nothing to lose anymore and started telling them that Elizabeth is right there with them, and only he can see her. Abby played along and took the children to another room, then grabbed an axe and ordered the psycho to get out of there. David then recalled an incident at the wedding that threw the woman off balance. She chased the eccentric away and checked on her daughters. David isn't giving up, so he went back to Daryl for help. And Daryl sensed that the ghost has fallen in love with him. Daryl speculated that Elizabeth might be prevented from returning to her body due to some unfinished business. And they also need to understand why David has such a strong connection with her. Elizabeth saw her photograph. David took it from the hospital because he was afraid he would never see her again. On the day she was photographed, Elizabeth failed an entrance exam. She didn't grieve and went out to party with her sister, having a great time. But that's what she spent the following years on. Aside from work, she doesn't remember anything, leaving life for later. Who knew that later wouldn't come? But she's glad to spend her last day with David, if only he could touch her. David woke up alone in bed. He was scared that Elizabeth was gone, but she was sitting next to him. The man came up with a plan for what to do next. He will steal body and buy some more time. David enlisted Jack's help, but didn't tell him the details of their plan. He had already confessed everything in the hospital. Jack listened attentively and suggested that David go with him to the psychiatric ward, but David resisted. All right, if the ghost is standing behind him, it will guide Jack's hand to indicate. David confessed that he's willing to do anything to save Elizabeth because he loves her. No one has ever told the girl that before. The company entered the room and Jack recognized Elizabeth. 3 months ago, he had set up a date that David never showed up for, and this girl ended up in an accident. That's why he sees her. Their meeting was destined, and Jackie's the same former Abby whom she kissed right before the wedding. Brad was about to enter the room. David left and, with Elizabeth's help, started feeding him false information. But when the conversation hit a dead end, he'd just knock it out. Security started chasing the culprits. Jack took one of them on himself. Unfortunately, the breathing tube remained in his hands, which means it's all over. Elizabeth began to fade away. David rushed to her body and kissed her lips. David was immediately subdued by the guards. But suddenly, Elizabeth's pulse returned. She regained consciousness. But she doesn't remember David and doesn't want him to touch her hand. The man had no choice but to leave. She also doesn't remember Daryl. Some time passed. Elizabeth returned home. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing here. Elizabeth sat on the couch and saw a mark from a cup on the table. She looked around and went up to the roof. David had created a beautiful garden there, the one Elizabeth had always dreamed of. Not wanting to scare her, David said his goodbyes and was about to leave. But Elizabeth asked him to return the key, and when their hands touched, she remembered everything. It wasn't a dream, and the lovers kissed. If you enjoyed my retelling, please support the channel with a comment of more than 4 words. It greatly helps promote the video. Goodbye.